There's something building in Las Vegas that I don't think the net landed the way it should. This isn't about one transaction or one name emerging in the news cycle this week. This is about an entire offseason of systematic significant moment. Because reports are now surfacing that Mark Davis has suggested these conversations are genuine. We are not talking about a good offseason anymore. We are talking about arriving at its logical conclusion. Let me set the full context first, because context is what makes the headline. Think back to where this franchise was just a few months ago. The quarterback position had been a source of genuine organizational pain for the better part of a decade. Not just bad play, but structural instability that prevented any coherent identity from forming around the most important position in the building. The coaching staff was in transition. The roster had talent scattered across it but lacked the depth and cohesion and unified organizational identity that separates competitive teams from genuine contenders. Raiders Nation, loyal, passionate, justifiably skeptical, after years of promises that dissolved into another disappointing reset, was being asked to believe once again that this time would be different. And then the offseason actually unfolded in a way that made the skepticism increasingly difficult to maintain. Clint Kubiak arrived and changed the energy inside that building in ways that were immediately visible and measurable. More than 60 players showing up voluntarily on day one of the offseason program before anything was mandatory or officially counted anywhere. Fernando Mendoza became a Raider, bringing a Heisman Trophy, a national championship, elite processing speed, and the kind of personal investment in his own development that cannot be manufactured or coached into someone who doesn't already carry it internally. The humility he displayed at the Raider Nation welcome event, a first overall pick talking about working his way up from the bottom, told you something real about the character underneath the talent. Ashton Jeanty gave the offense an explosive backfield identity that opposing defensive coordinators immediately began incorporating into their game planning. Mike Washington Jr., sitting in the fourth round with a perfect RAS score that represented the highest athletic composite at the running back position in nearly 4 decades of professional evaluation, gave that backfield the thunder and lightning dimension that makes both backs harder to stop simultaneously. The offensive line was reinforced with genuine investment. The secondary was deepened with players who brought pre-existing chemistry from their college systems. Tom Brady is in the building mentoring the franchise quarterback in ways that no amount of formal coaching structure can replicate. Kirk Cousins is providing veteran system familiarity and the daily example of what elite execution in Kubiak's offense actually looks like in real time. Pick by pick, move by move, this roster has been assembled with a clarity of vision that has been genuinely absent from this organization for years. And at virtually every position group, the picture has moved from concerning to competitive to genuinely exciting in a compressed window of time that most rebuilding processes don't produce. But here is the honest truth that every serious football evaluator acknowledged even as the praise was building around this roster. The one area where a meaningful question remained, the one position group where the Raiders were good but not yet elite, was the edge. Maxx Crosby is locked in, and Crosby at his best is as individually dominant as any defensive player in this league on a weekly basis. Cron Crawford was added in the draft with real developmental upside the coaching staff will work to realize. But the depth behind Crosby, the pass rush insurance around him, the ability to consistently generate pressure from multiple directions, regardless of what else is happening on the field, that piece remained incomplete in a way that any honest assessment of the roster had to acknowledge directly. And now reportedly, Mark Davis has decided that piece deserves his personal attention to close. I want to be precise about where things actually stand before we go further, because clarity matters more than excitement when the information is still developing. These are active negotiations. The discussions are real, and the owner's personal involvement has been reported specifically, but nothing is signed. Professional football has a well-documented history of seemingly inevitable blockbuster moves that collapse before completion for reasons entirely unpredictable from the outside. And the honest version of this conversation holds both the genuine excitement and the genuine uncertainty simultaneously without collapsing one into the other. With that said, the fact that this conversation is happening at all is significant in a way that extends beyond the specific player involved. Because Myles Garrett does not become available with any frequency. He is not a quality starter being shopped because a team needs to clear cap space. He is not an aging former star whose best football is behind him. He is a generational defensive talent in the active prime of his career. Multiple Defensive Player of the Year awards. Consistent double-digit sack production across his NFL career. First step explosiveness combined with hand technique and leverage understanding that offensive tackles across this league have spent entire careers trying to solve and mostly failing at. He is the category of player that teams build defenses around, that opponents construct entire entire game plan specifically to contain that quarterbacks sense before they even begin their drop from center. Now place that player on the same defensive line as Maxx Crosby and think carefully about what that picture looks like from the opposing offensive coordinator's perspective on a Sunday night before a Cleveland game. You cannot single block either of them with any reasonable confidence. Committing your best tackle to Crosby means Garrett is working against your second best option. Committing your best tackle to Garrett means Crosby has a favorable matchup. Double teaming one creates a free rusher on the other side with a clear path to the quarterback. There is no clean answer available. There is no protection scheme or personnel grouping that makes you comfortable when Myles Garrett and Maxx Crosby are both aligned across from your offensive line simultaneously. That is not merely a good pass rush. That is a structural problem for every offense in the AFC that cannot be resolved through scheme creativity. It has to be endured on every passing snap of every game, and the cumulative effect of that endurance on opposing quarterbacks across a full season is the kind of thing that shows up in turnover numbers and passer ratings and playoff seeding in ways that trace back to this single acquisition decision. The systemic effects extend far beyond the sack column, and I want to be specific about that because I think the pass rush conversation typically undersells the full impact. Coverage is exponentially more sustainable when cornerbacks only need to hold their assignments for 2.5 seconds rather than 4, because the quarterback is already under duress before the route has had time to develop. Linebackers become more disruptive at the second level in run defense when offenses cannot commit extra blockers there because those blockers are required up front, managing Garrett and Crosby simultaneously. The secondary operates with more freedom and more aggression when opposing quarterbacks are forced into quick, uncomfortable decisions rather than sitting in clean pockets patiently dissecting coverage rotations until something opens. Adding one elite edge rusher doesn't just improve pass rush production in isolation. It improves every single element of the defense by making every other player's job meaningfully easier. That is what genuine difference makers at premium positions actually do. The statistical impact consistently understates the systemic effect. The dimension of this conversation that I think is being most significantly underappreciated is what it would mean specifically for Fernando Mendoza's development, because this is not purely a defensive transaction in its implications. It has direct consequences for the quarterback room. One of the most important and consistently undervalued factors in a young quarterback's professional growth is the quality of the pass rush he faces in daily practice during training camp and throughout the season preparation cycle. When your offense is going against a defensive line featuring Maxx Crosby and Myles Garrett in practice repetitions, every single snap becomes a genuine pressure situation requiring faster processing, quicker footwork, and better decision-making under duress than a standard NFL practice environment produces. That is the kind of daily preparation that accelerates quarterback development in ways that no amount of film study or classroom instruction can fully replicate. Mendoza would be walking into his first real NFL regular season having been tested relentlessly by two of the most elite pass rushers in professional football, and the competitive edge that builds in a young quarterback's processing speed and pocket awareness is not a small thing. It is one of the most valuable developmental environments an organization can construct, and it would exist inside the Raiders' own facility every single day. The specific detail that Mark Davis is personally involved in these negotiations deserves direct attention because it is not a minor footnote to the broader story. Owners do not typically enter the granular mechanics of trade discussions. That is front office work, general manager territory, the domain of professional negotiators operating within organizational parameters set above them. When an owner steps personally into that space, it carries one clear essential message, regardless of the specific reason for his involvement. Mark Davis has looked at the roster his front office and coaching staff assembled this offseason and concluded that the gap between where this team currently stands and where a championship contender needs to be is small enough that one more significant move could close it entirely. That is a fundamentally different version of Raiders ownership than what this fan base has sometimes experienced in difficult stretches of this franchise's recent history. It is exactly the version of ownership a team on the verge of something real requires when the moment arrives that demands it. When you step back and look at the complete picture of everything assembled in Las Vegas this offseason, all of it taken together rather than examined piece by piece as individual transactions, the word that keeps returning to me is complete. Not perfect, because no NFL roster is ever truly perfect, and the regular season has a well-documented habit of humbling anyone who becomes overconfident before a single game is played, but complete in the specific sense that matters most for genuine contention. Every major position group has at minimum quality starting caliber talent operating within it. When you examine this team unit by unit and try to identify the structural liability that opposing coordinators will design their entire approach around attacking, the search becomes genuinely difficult. Fernando Mendoza developing at a pace reportedly surprising people inside the building, mentored by Tom Brady, operating in a system built precisely for his capabilities with Kirk Cousins, providing daily system-specific guidance alongside him. Genty in Washington, giving the offense a ground identity that protects a young quarterback by keeping every defensive box honest regardless of game script. An offensive line rebuilt with real investment and genuine depth. Brock Bowers at tight end, a matchup problem the rest of the league still hasn't solved comprehensively. Crosby on the defensive front already, an overhauled secondary with pre-existing chemistry between its key pieces. And now potentially, Myles Garrett arriving to create the pass rush combination that has no clean structural answer anywhere in the conference. Raiders fans have waited a long time for an offseason they could look at honestly. Not hopefully, not optimistically, but honestly. And say that this team has assembled what it actually needs to compete for something real. This is that offseason. The foundation has been constructed correctly. The quarterback is in place and developing. The weapons are assembled around him with genuine intentionality. The defense is being built from the front out in the specific way that sustained winning requires. And if Myles Garrett lands in silver and black, the conversation shifts permanently. We stop discussing a franchise trending in the right direction, and we begin the honest, evidence-backed discussion of legitimate championship contention. The entire AFC is about to find out what version of the Las Vegas Raiders actually arrived this year. And if this final piece comes together the way the reports suggest it might, the answer to that question is going to surprise people who weren't paying close enough attention to everything that was being built while the national conversation was focused elsewhere.